We'll just go ahead and jump in, and as people trickle in, they'll catch on to what's going on. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first ever episode of this master series. I'm Jeremy Newlick. I'm from BoldrFutures. I'm here with Mr. Joel Post. Say hi, Joel.
Hello, everybody.
And I'm with Mr. Mark McClanahan from Mosby Building Arts. Say hi.
Hello there. Welcome.
Yeah. We're here because we suspect we may know something about you, those of you who have joined this call, and that is that you're facing a problem, a challenge that nearly every remodeling leader is facing, which is that you're spinning your wheels, you're working hard, and it's not because you lack some intelligence in what it takes to lead effectively, and it's not because you're not working hard, it's because you're trying to uncover profit loss. And how do you fix that permanently with the systems that will do that? We are here to talk about the kinds of leaders who have shifted from firefighting those profit problems and found a way up and out. And that's who you're joined with today. That's who's joining us today on this call is Mr. Mark McClanahan with this lovely cutout portrait of him. Luckily, you get to see the actual live guy. But just to give you more about Mr. McClanahan, he is the president of Mosby Building Arts. Started there in 2015. He's had quite the entrepreneurial journey for sure. He has been effective in leading a 76-year-old company to record-setting revenues and profits. Over and over again, Mosby Building Arts, that scale has not come at the sacrifice of his culture, because Mosby Building Arts for the last 10 years by those wonderful media folks that keep track of this sort of thing is voted as one of the best places to work in St. Louis. His personal mission from his own leadership perspective is to call people to their greatness, which is no small order and no small task, as we'll hear about more in our conversation with him. And just to let you know also, he has an unconventional past. He is a Grammy-nominated, Emmy award-winning, You're in the Presence of Greatness music producer. And we'll get more into how he ended up where he's at today as we listen to his story. And we also there's a Q&A function in here. So as we're talking to Mark about his story, about the systems he put in place, about how he was able to scale Mosby Building Arts, you can ask questions, and we'll get to those in the Q&A section. We did send you guys out something ahead of this session, and a lot of you talked about the need to, how can you match scale? How can you achieve scale and still keep what makes your company entrepreneurial? How do you continuously look for opportunities? How do you retain the flexibility of what it takes to be effective from an entrepreneurial perspective while still scaling your business? We'll definitely get to that in the Q&A for sure. But I think you might also just hear some of that in Mark's story. So right now, we're actually just going to jump in, and you get to look at these three guys on your screen. And we're going to just jump into a conversation with Mark about what his journey has been like. Mark, let's just start there. How is it that someone who has a background in music, a passion for music, how did you end up being the president of a remodeling company? Tell me that story.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. People ask about my role at Mosby, they ask, "What'd you do before then?" And of course, I tell them that I was a music producer and recording engineer for 17 years prior, and they all scratch their heads, like, how did that happen? And just to course correct a little bit, I started in 2010, became president in 2015. So just a little bit of a change in what you had on the screen there. So I joined the company, and I'll try to make this short because I know we want to get to a lot. I joined the company during the big recession, and I saw where the music industry was going, and I wasn't really happy with that. I was running a record label at the time, and the record label was certainly suffering because of that as well. So I just felt like that would be a good time to change my career. And I really fell in love with working with people and guiding people and running a company. So I met the Mosbys through that process. After a few meetings, we felt like we were really well aligned on how businesses should be run. They've been looking for somebody to groom, to eventually take over their company and run it for them so that they could retire, which is what ended up happening. We succeeded, and I was fortunate enough to meet them. They had a great culture, really a lot of great opportunities at the company, and in 2015, they made me president of the company.
They anointed you.
I know.
Right, right, exactly. Well done. So then So in 2015, the market was a lot different than that recession economy, right? And market was strong in those days. What was it like becoming president in 2015? How did you keep up with all that growth? Did it feel like a baptism by fire sorts?
Fortunately, Scott Mosby was a really great mentor of mine, and he was working side by side with me. I was the chief operating officer for most of the time up to me being moved to president. So I felt pretty well acclimated to the business and what was going on. So that was not daunting when I became president. However, in 2015, as much as everything was fine in the economy, relatively speaking, we were actually struggling with sales that year.
Interesting.
And I'd just become president and we're
It had to
struggling
be
with
tough.
sales. And so
Yeah.
we certainly overcame it. We're still here today, but I was challenged that year for sure.
And you told me about that because you talked about how it just didn't make sense to you that here we have a strong economy and yet we're struggling with sales. And when you presented why you thought that might be, I imagine you were scurrying around trying to come up with all the reasons, as to why it is. Talk to me about when you tried to present to your board, hey, here's some of the challenges we have. Here's a whole litany of everything that needs to be fixed. What was that conversation with them like?
Yeah, that was probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my career as a leader. Yeah, so I had a board meeting. I think it was we were in the third quarter. I was meeting with them and I'd had my presentation up on the screen. And that was when my board meetings were pretty formal. They're a little bit less formal now, but they're still pretty meaty as far as the content's concerned. And I was going through a list of, I recall, I don't remember everything on the list, but I had highlighted 6 things that I saw going wrong with sales that year and how we could correct them. And at the end of my presentation, I thought I did a pretty good job. I was patting myself on the back.
Sure.
Good job, Mark. And the board just said, you forgot something. I'm like, I thought I was pretty thorough. Maybe I did forget something. And they just said, what about, you don't have anything about your leadership up there?
Oh,
And I was like, whoa, that
it had to be humbling.
it was pretty humbling. I was actually first shocked, and it took me a bit to process it. In fact, it took me a few days, weeks to process understanding what that really meant, because in the moment, I was certainly emotional about that comment. And so what I learned and what I try to live by and certainly role model is that if there's any problem at the organization, doesn't matter where it is in the organization, I have to look at myself and say, what am I doing about, what is my leadership? How is my leadership contributing to that or helping that first before I start pointing fingers?
Wow. So you did mention already that's changed not just for you, but how's that changed your concept of leadership at Mosby? How's that lived out for you? That whole, hey, before you point at everyone else, look at the 4 fingers pointing at you idea that yeah, like it almost seems like bumper sticker-esque, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of its wisdom, but it's very different between seeing it on a bumper sticker versus actually living that reality. So how is that reality lived out for you at Mosby?
I'll give an example. Certainly, most companies have some sort of an attrition rate, right? You lose the person for one reason or another. Every time we lose somebody at the company, whether we're terminating them or they quit, I always ask, what could we have done differently to avoid that happening? It could be we made a bad hire and we should have done something different through the hiring process. What could we learn about us? What are the steps we took to contribute to that? Or it could be if we fired the person, were we just not coaching them right? Did we not give them the guidance they needed to be successful? So that's one way that it shows up. And frankly, if you look at any results at the organization, I believe we all try to really look at ourselves and say, what is there something for us to learn here? Because really,
Sure.
in anything, when there's some sort of pain and a bad result could be considered a pain, there's an opportunity for growth.
Joel, what are you seeing from ReadyBuild customers? Because I know that ReadyBuild works with a lot of different remodeling companies. Is that something as a theme among them?
Without a doubt. I think a lot of our customers, they grow through various stages and then they plateau, and then they're like, how do we get to that next level? What changes do we have to make? How do we have to do things differently? The old saying of got us here won't get us there. And sometimes that applies to processes, sometimes that applies to people. And that's definitely a core consideration that most of our customers face. Mark, I think from a follow-up to what you mentioned, one of the questions I have is just how did that mindset shift that you took on trickle down and throughout your day-to-day operations, whether it was your leadership team, whether it was their employees, from that moment that you walked forward in that mindset, how did that impact the rest of your team and how long did that take?
Yeah, I think one of the things so I got a specific example in mind that I'd like to share. But what I really learned is that I think it's really important to, somebody recently said, and so this is more recent, somebody recently said to me, legacy is not a strategy. That you should always be challenging what's happening, but by being curious about what's going on. And so a very specific example that I could share actually was in 2000, I think this was in actually 2018. And in 2018, I went to my sales leader and my production leader at the time and was having a conversation with them about what our opportunities are. Like, where are we missing things that we could be doing better? And specifically, one of the leaders said to me, he said, Mark, if you look at our numbers, we're generally doing fine and we're performing at 2 points over our direct margins, our margins. Yeah. And I said, yeah, but what's underneath that? And I remember I then decided to look in to have a custom report created in our ERP, which is ReadyBuild. And I wanted to find out where all of our, where were we losing money? What are all the jobs that we lost money and how much did that equate to? And I was shocked. And I was able to go back a handful of years. I was shocked at the literally hundreds of thousands of dollars that we were losing every year. And even though if you look as an aggregate, we were performing better. And I went back to these two people and I just said, here is a place of opportunity for us. This is something that we could sink our teeth into and make a change. That's another way that it manifests, which is where are the opportunities that we could be doing better because we're just not paying attention to the things we should be paying attention to.
Yeah, I see that a lot. And I think you probably described it perfectly in that things look great on the surface level, right? Margins are solid. The bottom line looks okay, but you had a gut sense that there was something off. What was driving that kind of gut reaction and what motivated you to dig deeper? Was it employee sentiment? Did you feel frustration and complications in your internal communications and dialogue? What was driving your gut reaction there?
Well, honestly, I was looking at our peers and I saw some peers who were performing better than us from a net profit standpoint. And even though our margins were performing pretty well overall, I just was curious, why are we still not as profitable as these other companies? And so that's where my curiosity came in and I just wanted to dive down deeper into it. So really it's just about looking at examples of greatness and just saying, wow, okay, if these can do this, what can we learn? These people can do this, what can we learn from that? So that's really what drove that particular thing. There wasn't really anything from a culture standpoint, I would say, that stuck out to me at that moment, other than just looking at the business leaders at the time and saying everything's been fine. And this is the whole thing. Legacy is not a strategy. Really resonates with me, even though it's a newer phrase that I heard from a gentleman named Chris Seaver. I think he said that around Thompson Creek. So anyway, it was
That's
really
kind
just
of like
looking at other
if it
analogs.
if it ain't broke, don't fix it is basically legacy is not a strategy. What we've been doing ain't what we're going to do. That's not a tacit understanding of what real strategy is. We've always done it this way. And when you started digging into those numbers and seeing those opportunities, what happened? How did that land? When you brought it to those folks, what was their perspective on
The production leader at the time just wasn't having it, unfortunately, and just continued to make excuses. And what I learned, and I'd worked with him for a few years trying to get really him to shift how he was operating and how he was behaving. And what I realized, it's 3 years later, it's in 2021, what I realized that he had some deep-seated values that didn't align with the values of the company.
Wow.
And which then also led to me really understanding that we had a lack of a culture of accountability.
Wow.
Even though we had a fun culture, an engaging culture, people liked working here, we certainly lacked a culture of accountability. And through having conversations with the employees and doing some engagement surveys that came out. And if you look at the numbers, you could also see that too, right? Sadly, that person doesn't work here anymore because there just wasn't.
There was an alignment
There
of
was
values.
not alignment, yes.
So when you looked at all those systems, what else came to light for you when it came from a systems perspective? What was the fundamental problem that you discovered? And you talked about this need for a culture of accountability for sure. But what was the fundamental problem that was underneath when you dug into ReadyBuild and looked at the numbers?
Oh, I would say, I know we've talked about this before, and so I have this formula that I talk about at the company all the time. And it's a very simple formula. It's somebody that I learned. It's a formula I learned from actually a previous board member, a Mosby board member. Her name is Jackie James, and she was a big influence on my life. In fact, I have a receipt that I have tacked up here in my bulletin board, which I just pulled down here in case we ended up talking about it. In fact, I'll share it with you here. So
The artifact.
just to prove it's a receipt, this is from 2014.
Why did you order the lobster roll?
Yeah, that's right. I had a Philly cheesesteak. September 30th of 2014. So anyway, I wrote this on the back of it when we were talking. It's B+P = R. Behaviors plus processes equal results. And at the time, I didn't quite get it. I was like kind of scratching my head. I'm like, it sounds interesting. So I wrote it down. So I didn't like latch onto that in 2014. Other than that, I felt like it was important. And so now it's a part of our culture. It's part of my employee orientation. It's a part of my regular conversations with employees, either one-on-one or in group settings, any kind of communication where I have an opportunity. And what it really means is that all of our results that we get, which are lagging measures, by the way, all of our results are a result of our behaviors plus our processes. So if the quality of your results are not what you want, you have to look back and say, what led to that? Is this a behavior problem, training problem for behaviors? Is this a process problem? Is it both? So the quality of your results are directly related to the quality of your behaviors and the quality of your processes. And to me, it's so simple. It's actually so simple, sometimes people forget about it, but it really will drive you to looking at things. And so then that led, if I can continue on, that led into understanding that results are almost always lagging measures. So you really have to pay attention to what are the leading measures to get that? What are the leading behaviors to get those results? And that's what you really need to spend your time measuring and keeping an eye on, and really coaching to, and holding your people accountable to.
Go ahead, Joel.
That formula is pretty, I guess, comparable to your looking in the mirror scenario where, if something's happening, we have to look upon ourselves and say, okay, is it a behavior problem that, we need to address, or is it a process problem? Mm-hmm. So just that self-reflection of that lagging outcome is definitely aligned with your overall mindset for sure.
Yeah, I had a conversation today, just to share a real life example. I had a conversation today. We're a sizable home remodeling company. We have 140 employees. So relatively speaking, we've got a lot of moving parts. We do 450 projects a year. We do large jobs, very large complex jobs to very small jobs. We have a warehouse, 11,000 square foot warehouse. We have a full-time warehouse person. That warehouse person is responsible for also tracking our tools and equipment that are owned by the company and used by the field employees. And we have a couple delivery guys, and we were having a discussion today about a jackhammer that ended up moving from job to job, and nobody knew where the jackhammer was. And So the result is a missing jackhammer, right?
Yeah.
So in the conversation with these production leaders, I was sitting in the meeting, they were discussing the situation. I said, okay, is this a process problem or behavior problem? And we found out it's a process problem, actually. There's a part of the process that is broken and that needs to be fixed. It's not because there's bad intentions. It's just because we did not tool up our company well enough without having the right process in place to make sure that we knew where that jackhammer was.
It's really beautiful. Only also because it's such a, I wonder how you deal with the objection of, dude, we scheduled a webinar with you to talk to you about how you grew from 10 million to 30 million, and you're going to hit people with B+P = R. It feels almost too simple. Like there's so much ink that is generated either digitally or in real life about what it takes to really run a remodeling company. And you're going to hit people with something that's simple. How do you deal with that objection?
Yeah, it's pretty funny because I thought about, somebody asked me, you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, it'd be a pretty simple book. It'd
Sure.
be based on B+P = R.
But how does the simplicity of it actually work? Like, how does it work in your favor? In other words, I'm teeing up your answer, forgive me a little bit, but is there something that is valuable, useful about the fact that, no, this is actually really simple?
Think about it this way. I don't know who taught me this. It was years ago. Another common formula we use here, sorry for that, all the formulas, is 7 squared. And 7 squared is something we talk about at the organization a lot. And 7 squared stands for the average person needs to hear something 7 times at a 7th grade level.
Wow.
In order for that new thing to stick. And so we use that in our training. We use that in our communications. You were like, okay, how many times have we touched them with this? So this formula is a part of the simplicity, right? The 7th grade level. And you could say it's even simpler than 7th grade. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just saying that the point is you just need to make it simple in order for people to really be able to understand something and be effective with it.
So you gave the jackhammer example. Is there kind of other examples of implementation of this process, whether it was scope alignment or hours estimations or anything like that? Kind of, was there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I will say that there's a few examples I can give. Yeah, I mentioned earlier the amount of money that we were losing, right? And so at that time, we spent significant effort trying to figure out where we were losing money. And this is all in us trying to develop this culture of accountability and find out what's really happening. So we found out that there were 11 ways that we lost money. And in some of them, we lose more money than less, but it identified these. And then we said, okay, now how do we measure? Like, what are the processes that we have in place for each of these? What are the behaviors we need to change? Literally broke it down to each one of those and say, okay, here's the problem. Now, what is the process that we either need to refine or create? And then what are the behaviors that we need to make sure that the employees are doing? So to give a specific example would be hours, estimated hours versus estimated hours used on a job. And in our system, we have an estimate that is in the system, and then employees on their phones track their time, and as they work on items in the scope, so you can imagine a list of items in the scope that need to be done. Each one of those items in the scope have hours attached to them. This item takes 10 hours, this item takes 5 hours, this item takes 20 hours, whatever, doesn't matter. And as they work on these things, they click what they've done. Okay. So now we have a record of what they said was done. And if they clicked off 10 items that said was supposed to take 100 hours, and they've also clocked in separately, this is a separate thing. This is just them clocking in. And let's just say they have worked 110 hours. Okay. And we're only a quarter of the way through the job. So maybe there's 400 hours total for the job. Now we could say that we are working inefficiently by 10%. And we're only 25% of the job. So then we can lean in and say, now we can do something about that way before we get to the end of the job, way before we count all the cost, put all the costs in, put all of the hours in, and then say, okay, the job, we've collected all the money and we lost X amount of dollars. Now we can head that off well before we run into a problem. So that's an example of a cost control that we put in place.
Yeah, I think that example is probably runs through every customer that we talk to. Is just the mentality of, well, we'll be better next time. And you're having to retroactively look at those opportunities. And, what we really encourage our customers is to be better in real time, right? Is to have that information at your fingertips in whether it's daily or weekly, so that you can step in and say, look, we're off target here. We need to make some adjustments, whether it's resources or process within the job. You can make that change on the fly and catch that slippage before it gets out of control.
Yeah.
So how did you actually get your team to focus and implement these new processes? Was that a challenge?
It wasn't it was only a challenge because of the magnitude of the problem. When I say we were losing hundreds of thousands of dollars, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and we were much smaller then.
Yeah.
So it hurt a lot more at that time.
Yeah.
And not that losing hundreds of thousands of dollars doesn't hurt, but I'm just saying, in scale,
I was going to say, I have a way you can lose hundreds of thousands of dollars if you are interested in hearing about that.
Yeah. So it took some time for us to really understand what was going on. And it's a part of the process we included the employees. This was not a top-down, I see what's going on, I'm going to change what you do by telling you what to do. It was much more, we would put together cross-functional teams to say, here's our challenge. This is what we're losing. What do you think's contributing to that? And it was really a team of employees who came up with that list of 11, just if we're going to stick to this one particular topic, they're the ones that came up with the list of 11 items. So because they were a part of that, which is I consider to be a best practice, because they were a part of that, they were also part of that. Okay, let's have a conversation of what is the solution. So then they would help brainstorm whatever the solutions were. So they were a part of developing the processes, defining the behaviors after we've identified what the problems were. And then so it made it a lot easier to implement these things. Now, it didn't happen overnight. Certainly we'd have to learn new habits, and sometimes new habits are not easy to learn. So it took time. It didn't happen overnight, but including the employees in the process was a big part of that.
It was really interesting because it's almost like you shortcut the need for adoption, to use a technology term, right? It's like you didn't have to give them, here's a new set of directives and a technology in the form of SOPs, and just do these the way I said so because I said so. But because they took part in it, they had some form of intrinsic motivation to, we want to see this through. This is the change we want to make. How did it change from a leadership dynamic perspective? How did that show up in the rest of the organization culturally then? Or did it change the nature of conversations that people had? In other words, did it start making it such that you're not the one having to say, hey, let's relook at our behaviors and our processes? Did you start to see that show up throughout the organization? And if so, where did it show up?
Yeah, so I think if you were to talk to I would say almost any employee, maybe a new employee may not feel this way, but I feel like if you were to ask any employee if they felt empowered to offer suggestions, to point out a problem, we've certainly have a cadence or a culture of a cadence of just listening and allowing people to share where they think that there's opportunity for improvement. So I think that's a newer part of our culture. It certainly didn't happen overnight, but it is certainly a way that we've accomplished this. We've really tried to avoid a top-down. Certainly when it comes to strategy and what the vision of the company is, it's certainly going to come more from leadership because we have the time and the bandwidth to really think that way. The employees are in it. They're in the whirlwind. And we do try to get them to be a part of those conversations. But just as a regular, if they run into a problem, a day-to-day problem, they know they can reach out to their manager, they can reach out to me, they can send us a note, and they can say, hey, here's something that I think is an opportunity. And we try to look at that pretty seriously and be curious about what's going on.
Have you ever had it weaponized against you? Has anybody ever said, I shouldn't have used weaponized? Have you ever had it like thrown at you? In other words, hey, Mark, I took a look at this result and it's your behavior. Has that ever happened? Have you ever had a
Gosh,
conversation, or has that been something that you feel is more like yours?
I can't think of a specific example. My director of operations is Sarah Tabaka. She's essentially my right hand here. And she's the one that I rely on to tell me when I'm out of bounds. Because you think,
Right.
when I'm the president of the company, I could be, because of my position, my title, it's intimidating for a lot of employees. And even though I try to be vulnerable and humble in front of them and ask for input, and by the way, I do that in group settings. So there's plenty of settings where I'll walk into small group settings, or in town halls. We have town halls usually once a year. And in those settings, they're all guided by what the employees want to talk about. In fact, last year, just to share, the town hall meetings used to be voluntary. I should say we haven't made a permanent change yet. And so we would get maybe 30, 40 employees to it, not the entire company. So I'd asked the management team, I said, can I use one of our company meetings to be a town hall meeting? So last fall, we had 130 employees, 125 employees at that time. So it was about a year ago. And we had a town hall meeting with all the employees because I wanted them all to have a chance to experience that. And a town hall meeting is 100% driven by what the employees want to talk about. We send out surveys ahead of time. We ask them a series of questions that would help tease out things that would be important for us to talk about with them. And then we send it back out to be voted on, because if you have that many people in a room, you want to at least narrow down the topics. And then you get the topics narrowed down, and then you bring it to the employees and you say, okay, here are the main topics you all wanted to talk about. Where do you want to start? And right in that meeting, we just go. And then the questions start coming out, and to me, it's fun and exciting, and it can be challenging because they're going to put me on the spot. So I do try to provide opportunities for employees to speak truth to power. And I also have Sarah to keep an eye on me.
It's good. It's good. Everybody needs one.
Yeah.
But I imagine, anyway, that at times some of those problems are even things that you have to research.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Have we heard the term tariff lately? And so what was that like dealing with big problems or things that people are still, maybe they're just they're nascent problems. They're things we don't know what the impact is. Have those been the kinds of things that you've brought in front of people and established some amount of?
Yeah, it's a great question. So once a month, we have an all office meeting. I wish we had the luxury of having a whole company meeting once a month. It's just not practical. I cannot say the word right. It doesn't matter. It's just not feasible, right? Once a month, we have about 55, 60 employees sit in a room together, and we give reports to them about what's going on. And last spring, because of all the early conversations about tariffs, we had a conversation about that, because the word uncertainty, by the way, when I got prepared for this meeting, I pay attention to the Beige Book, and the Beige Book is put out by the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
And so every time it comes out, I typically pull it out and read what's going on. And I pay attention to really what's happening at the St. Louis Federal Reserve. But I read that. And so I was interested to find out how many times the word tariffs and how many times the word uncertainty was used in the Beige Book. And my good friend AI helped me out. And so I went back a couple of years and I said, how many times was the word tariff used and how many times was the word uncertainty used? And I said, how last back a year. And then I said recently. And it was like exponential, the word uncertainty. And certainly, I think you think about media, they're all talking about uncertainty. So I felt that my employees probably feel like things are uncertain right now, and let's have a conversation about it. And so I do try to have a dialogue with them to allow them to express what's on their mind, and to let them know we are paying attention to it too, because they may be going, what are our leaders doing about this uncertain situation? And by the way, I make it crystal clear, we're not talking about politics. Politics, that's a rail we just don't touch at this organization, because in any organization, you're going to have people who feel one way or the other. Sure. And what I don't want to do is create a divide in our company. But we can talk about the economy. We can talk about things that are going to affect their livelihoods. And that's what we focus on. So I try to create a platform for us to talk about things like that.
Yeah, that's quite the tightrope though, right? Because even things like the economy, when you touch the rail of tariffs, certainly has political implication for sure. So it had to be a tightrope to
It was,
try to.
but I brought in data. I used the beige book. I actually went back and I literally did a deep dive and I went back 100 years and looked at the unemployment rate for 10 years, the GDP for 10 years, manufacturing, exports and imports for 10 years. And I was able to show them the data and how this all works together. Because if there's one thing I study, it's the economy and I understand how the economy works from a macro level. Okay, just to be clear. I'm not an economist and I'm not even going to pretend to say where things are going. And
Sure.
this is not about the stock market. This is just about the economy. So I do pay attention to it. So I wanted to let them know I pay attention to this data and try to make good business decisions based on what we see going on. So I'm trying to let them feel at ease so they can worry about taking care of our customers and know that we're here to do everything that we can to make really good business decisions.
Yeah. As we're nearing the tail end of this conversation, one of the things I wanted to follow back up on was the results that you experienced in implementing these systems and processes. You came in, was it 18, and you're talking about your margin deficits and where you were losing money. These changes that you implemented over the last almost 10 years, how has that impacted the overall efficiency of the company? Has it impacted, your cycle times, your margins, employee retention? What are your thoughts on the outcomes?
Yeah, I think the biggest number I could just share with you is that our loss rate, like if I'm looking at losses compared to revenue, I think in our highest year, it was in the low 5% of just dollars that were lost on jobs that lost money. So if you look at all the jobs that lost money, we were losing about that amount of money. So we're down to about 1.5%.
Wow.
I think that's what I saw in my last report was 1.5%. And that's a rolling 12-month look, by the way.
Okay.
So that's, from a measurable standpoint, significant. And that is 100% related to these cost controls that we put in place, measuring, paying attention to the leading measures and focusing on those and not the lagging measures. Which then trickled into the bottom line as well, by the way. But that's the number we look at. We look at that on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is a 3.5% change in an organization of your size is not insignificant.
Yeah.
So beyond just those numbers, what you're implementing all these costs, you're using all those leading indicators, you're making adjustments. What cultural changes occurred in the organization as a result of that when you guys have conversations about results?
I would say, I think we can always make improvements. So I don't want to say we now have a culture of accountability. I'd like to think we do, but if we were on a scale of 1 to 10 and 1 being no accountability to 10 being everybody's 100% accountable all the time, we were probably like a 3 back then. And I would hope, and this is anecdotally, I hope we're around 7 or something in that range. But there's no doubt that there's a much higher level of culture of accountability. And that doesn't mean, by the way, I will say, it wasn't like we started with accountability. We started with figuring out what was going on. Because the other thing that we really learned here, and this is a big change, we have a mission statement, it's a newer mission statement, and the mission statement is to set and crush expectations. Some people would joke about the word crush, but we wanted to have something that people would remember.
Something that you guys can chest bump at all of your leadership meetings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what we realized is that if you don't set clear expectations, then how are you going to have a culture of accountability? How can we hold ourselves to our clients? Like, we set expectations with our clients at every step of the way. We tell them what the first appointment's going to be like. We tell them what our design interview and measure photo is going to be like for our large jobs. We tell them what it's going to be like after they sign the contract between now and the time we start their job. We tell them, and these are literally steps that we share. This is what to expect. This is what to expect. This is what to expect prior to what we're about to do. This is what to expect when you're going to be in construction. This is what to expect at the end of your construction. This is what to expect after your construction. And we have part of our process. We share with them literally a document that says, this is what to expect. So we're holding ourselves accountable to what we tell the customers they should expect, because a lot of that has to do with what we're going to be doing with them. So you have to set expectations or you cannot hold people accountable. And so because of that, like I said, I don't have a measure, like I don't have a measuring stick that says this is your level of accountability, but I can just say that based on all the things we put in place and the numbers, and we have a fairly low attrition rate. So it's not like people are out the door. So I feel good about that. We've got a lot of longstanding employees that we celebrate. So those are the results that I'm seeing.
Joel, it sounds like you have another thing on your roadmap for Ready Build is you need a measure of accountability built into it. So you just pull that up every time you're talking to people.
I'm sure there's a way to do that, right?
Always,
Well,
always a
we've
way.
just institute a social scoring system. That's not at all creepy. That would be just fine. Some of the questions that we got ahead of time that I think are useful is great that you have a way to measure your performance. And let's say I'm a CEO of a construction firm and I want to start. What's the place I should start? What do you recommend in terms of I want to find a leading measure in my organization, knowing nothing about this organization? Where should they start measuring? What are the leading measures that you think cut across that would be a great place to start?
Okay, I'm going to back up to one thing and then I go to a very specific thing. They're both specific, but the first thing is how I'd answer the question regarding first you need to make sure that you have leaders in place, including yourself, that is going to really own what's happening at the company. Going back to my lesson in 2015, really, how am I showing up and what am I doing? Because you have to be there first in order to own what you're about to uncover. So where would you start from a specific standpoint? I think you need to look at your KPIs, and your KPIs are your net profit, your gross profit, your closing rates, your average job size. We measure cycle times, how long things take from one point to another point. Those are some lagging indicators. So first of all, you need to put measurements in place. If you don't have any KPIs, you need KPIs. And then the next place I'd start would be look at a result you're unhappy with, and then start looking deeper there. What are the processes and behaviors that are leading to those things? So that's how I'd pull it apart. If you want to get specific about losses on jobs, if you want to just go straight to jobs, which is where the rubber meets the road and how companies make money, then I would absolutely look at your costs and how you're measuring your costs in real time. So getting even more granular, how are you measuring your costs in real time? So the costs are your hours used, right? That's a great cost. Sure. Hours used versus hours estimate. You have to have a way to track that versus it's in its percentage of the job being done. You have to look at what you've estimated from materials and making sure, and that one's the easiest probably to keep an eye on. The hours are probably the hardest one, but another one that we measure is store trips.
Oh, interesting.
The more store trips you make, the more money you're losing. And that is absolutely one that we measured and we uncovered as a way to reduce our job losses. And the behavior there that we found was that our project managers and specialty leaders were not ordering materials in advance to get to the job site for our leads and team on the field to do their work.
Execute.
Yeah, to execute. And so instead, the leads in the job were stopping because they needed something, leaving the job site, not earning us any revenue, and costing us money at the same time. So that's another one. So store trips is probably a big one that we learned a lot from.
It's huge. It's huge. Another question we had submitted, we called out even how we framed up this webinar, which was, look, you scaled significantly over the course of 10 years. What did it take to, inside this question are some assumptions, like that had to be a huge change in your sales operation. So what were some of the biggest changes you made and adjusted in how you thought about your sales operation? And they had a second question, but I'll let you answer this one first. But yeah, like what modifications did you make from a marketing sales engine perspective?
Good question. So what we learned about our organization is that we're a full service remodeling company. And what that means is 55%, I got to answer it through telling you what we are and then what we did to modify the sales organization. So we sell 55% of our business is design build, large complex jobs. Some businesses are just that. We also do 20% of our business is exterior. So that's windows, doors, siding, garage doors. And the other 20% say semi-custom kitchen and bath division. And then about 5% are small remodeling projects. That could be, I want to have some new built-ins put in an office, or I want to have new flooring and painting done, any kind of small project. Some people may call that handyman, but we call that small projects. So what we did at first, our sales team were generalists. They would go and they would sell. We'd have to have a salesperson. By the way, we have somebody who can do this. He's been with us for 22 years. But he could go out and he could sell a large, complex design build job, turn around, figure out why somebody's having a water leak and solve that problem for them, then sell a package of windows, then go talk to somebody about building some built-ins in their office, and go look at doing an outdoor kitchen or a patio or a deck. And so this person who works with us today, his name's Rich Horace, knows everything about the home and can sell anything at the home.
Wow.
And so try to hire somebody like that.
It's a unicorn salesperson.
Right. Yeah, it's really hard. So what we decided to do was to do specialists. So we have people who, we still have some generalists, but we try to specialize. So we have exterior salespeople, we have kitchen and bath salespeople, we have design build salespeople, and we try to hire for those and train for those particular skill sets. By the way, that applies out into the field as well. So we're really vertically integrated. We have a lot of people in the field, vertically integrated. We have plumbers, electricians, painters, carpenters. Everybody's got carpenters, tile setters. But let's talk about carpenters. At that same time, we hired carpenters who had to do everything. They had to know how to install kitchen cabinetry and then also know how to install windows and flash them properly or anything else. That's not easy to hire for either. And frankly, some of them don't even want to do the other item. So we ended up specializing our sales team. That you're asking how we changed that.
Yeah.
Specializing our sales team from a marketing standpoint. I'm sorry, let me finish this. And then specialize our field team. And we do. We have project managers. We have 10 project managers. We have some are doing design build only, some are doing exteriors only, and some are doing kitchen and baths only. And so we started for scale. We started dividing up in specific jobs to be more specialists. Mm-hmm. And then from a marketing standpoint, we would then have to market in different ways as well, because people are going to think about their home in a different way. And we have to make sure that we're saying different types of messages to feed each one of those verticals.
Sure. So the follow-on question was, all those changes you made, the change to the structure and the specialization, like you outlined, how did you embark on that journey and preserve or hold up the culture of the organization? How did that remain consistent, and potentially what had to change in terms of the culture of the organization to make that kind of a shift?
Yeah, first of all, being transparent. We're a transparent organization. Any employee at this company can sit in on one of our leadership meetings. They just have to sign up. Any employee at this company can have breakfast. I take employees out to breakfast once a month, and they can sign up. And in that meeting, they can ask any question they want. They could sit in my office, ask me a question. They can call me. They could text me. And we will share anything with them that they want to know. They want to know how much we spend on toilet paper a year. I'll tell them. They want to know how much we make at the end of the year, what we keep. I'll tell them. The only thing I won't tell them is anything personal, like how much a person makes at the company. They can go talk to them about it if they want to talk about it, but I'm not going to share confidential information about a person. So transparency is you just be transparent. And always talk about why. Certainly Simon Sinek is famous for starting with why. You got to talk about why you're doing things. And I will tell you, some people will not like the change and they will leave. Because we've grown from what I learned was called a personality-driven company to a process-driven company. And a personality-driven company, from what I understand, is people wear many hats and they can impact a lot of the organization because, I'm going to do this now. I'm going to do this now. I'm going to do this now. This is the hat I'm going to wear. But as you grow and scale, the people who used to be able to do a lot more, all of a sudden have to become specialists and they don't do as much like they used to. And so you're going to lose those people because they really like that. So you will lose some people because of that. So we did lose some longstanding employees because of the change. And we certainly retained a lot of them as well because they liked the change and they understood where we were going.
Sure. It sounds like that's a function of leadership, is being willing to be vision oriented, strategy oriented in the decisions you're making, knowing that this is the direction that we need to go. And that makes sense. Absolutely. Joel, you want to head us out?
Yeah. So, Mark, thank you sincerely for taking the time today. You've been a long time collaborator with us and a mentor to myself over the years. So I've learned a lot of these things that you shared with us today. I've had the benefit of learning along the way through your wisdom and sharing that info. So thank you again for taking the time. And Jeremy, thank you for being a part of this. If anybody's
I'm on your
interested,
shoe. Yeah, go for it.
if anybody's interested in discussing this further and how technology helps support Mark and his team, please feel free to scan the QR code, and we'd be happy to show you a demo of our product. No sales pitch, just understanding how it can work within an organization. So that's something that we'll offer for anyone that's interested. Thanks for attending. And Jeremy, I know
Hey, here's something that is an incredibly, I'll be overt. This probably would be a sales pitch, but feel free to hit this QR code too. BoldrFutures team, we love working with CEOs like Mark McClanahan, who are vision oriented and how they're building the fundamental value in their organization. And it's our intention to continue to bring y'all this level of thinking when it comes to what it takes to lead an organization, to scale, to build real value in an organization. And what everybody can look forward to in your inbox coming soon will be an invite to the next in our master series. I would tell you who it is, but we're going to just try our best to do the Taylor Swift teaser here and say it'll be something big. It'll be unlike anything you've experienced, and you'll get a chance to hear from somebody much like Mark McClanahan, who has been in the trenches and led his organization to achieve its vision. Mark, you are a king among men. Thank you for the time today. You are the real article for anybody who's on here who doesn't know him. Please take the opportunity to get to know him. Everything you said here today, you can absolutely stand on. So thank you so much, Mark. Thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.